Thank you, Andres, for the presentation, for the introduction. And I think I have to apologize already to you. It's been a year that you tried to ask me to come here to do a seminar, and finally I'm here. So today I'm going to talk about charging behavior, okay? And this is a joint work with Professor Joe Rose, sitting there. And essentially, I'm very proud of this particular paper in the sense that it is a collective effort between ITLS, so the Institute of Transport Logistics Studies, and the Australian Electric Vehicle Council, okay? So the core of this presentation is a survey that we did with them last year. It's about electric vehicle ownership, but there is a bit of a twist in terms of modeling that I'm going to discuss during the presentation, okay? So I set this in with a background, few numbers that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And then, of course, I introduce the motivation. I will spend a bit of time talking about the electric vehicle ownership survey. Not much about model specification, because I kept the equations at the very minimum. But we'll sort of give you an understanding of what this multiple discrete continuous choice models is, okay? Then model results, model application, and some concluding remarks, okay? Now, a background. When we look at emissions in 2007, we could see that emissions in Australia reached their peak. About 640 million tons of greenhouse gases were emitted in 2007. Overall emissions, about 15 years later, dropped by around 28%. But when we actually look at what happened, we could clearly see that, for instance, transport emission increased from 13 to 20%. So in general, emission drop. When we look at the subcategories, you could see that transport emission increased by 9%, station energy by 25%. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about transport in particular, and then why electric vehicle might not help reducing the emissions coming from the transport sector. Okay. Now, when we look at the number of passenger vehicles in particular, 21 million of vehicles were registered in Australia in 2023. So 72% are basically passenger vehicles, okay? When we look at the fuel-efficient vehicles, we look at 1 in 10, not even, 0.85% of registered passenger vehicles are electric, okay? Now, when this is the same number that we have when it comes to buses, and lower than when it comes to commercial vehicles. Okay, so clearly, even if we're discussing about over time, we still ground that we have to cover if you want to increase the electric vehicle uptake in Australia. But if you want to look at from a positive sign, this is a chart showing the evolution of the market share. So 2014, we're talking about 11 years ago, almost 70% of the market share of new cars, we're looking at petrol vehicles, okay? So fuel-efficient vehicles account for not even 1% of the market, 11 years ago. Now you can see that over time, the market share for petrol vehicles just dropped substantially, okay? And at the same time, there's been a rise here. So number for hybrid and battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric are ramping up over the past 4 years. So clearly something good is happening. There were like about 38 electric vehicles on Australian roads 11 years ago, and our numbers are increasing, okay? But when we actually try to look at the past 2 years, what we can clearly see that there is an overlap between battery electric, so let's call it electric vehicles and hybrid vehicle in 2023, but actually the sales of electric vehicles are kind of platooning here, okay? Whereas hybrid vehicles sales are increasing over time. So this is telling us something that people might want to move away from conventional vehicles, okay? But they're still very much concerned about some factors, okay? And what are we talking about? Range anxiety used to be an issue, not anymore. We're talking about for early adopters, okay? Now, if we say that we travel on average 23 kilometers per day, an average range of 350 is more than sufficient to cover almost 10 days without charging. So range anxiety is no longer an issue. When we look at a lack of car models, not all car models were actually imported here in Australia. And also the delay in actually receiving the vehicle was a big of an issue at the beginning, and particularly because of the conflicts that are happening in Europe and the shortage of microchips, for instance, but it's becoming less of a problem. The purchase price, indeed, the purchase price is still a barrier, okay? Even though Tesla dumped the price of a Model 3 by $14,000, but still the upfront cost is very higher compared to petrol vehicles. But we know this, right? Now, what is the real factors? When we talk about the real factor, we can look at the lack of the second-hand market. This has to do with the battery life, right? Typically, we say the battery life could be between 8 and 10 years, but it's very much tied to the way we drive the vehicle, how we charge. We charge between 20 and 80% or up to 100%. So this is a barrier because actually, if we cannot afford a full price of an electric vehicle, usually we look at the second market. But if it's too expensive or there are not actually second-hand vehicles, this is a problem. Also, what we are serving in 2025, not in this, we also ask a question about whether they check the battery upon buying a second-hand electric vehicle. Not of the respondents say yes, those who actually bought a second-hand electric vehicle. And this is a big of a problem, right? Because usually when you want to check the health of the battery for a second-hand vehicle, it costs a bit more. Not all the car dealership offer this service. So this is something else that we have to factor in. Insurance is usually on average insurance for an electric vehicle is 15–20% higher. It's a problem. Lack of national EV standards. Well, we come a long way in that last year introduced the standards. So essentially, we now regulate the type of petrol vehicles that we import in Australia. So we try to avoid importing polluting vehicles from Europe because we don't make vehicles here. We tend to import them.
Good question. So insurance is higher because they are more expensive because of your last slide, or is for the same price of cars, they are 20% higher than insurance?
It's higher because you tend to cover other damaged sides on the battery, on other side effects that you can have when you buy an electric vehicle.
50K normal car versus 50K electric car.
Usually, if you look at the battery, yes, 15–20% more. This I do collect this number for the 25. So I did also rough statistics as to what do we have. So and then what we are going to talk about in this presentation in particular is like charging behavior, okay? And why is important. So it's still an issue when we want to have our charger installed at private properties. If you live in an apartment building, you have to deal with strata. Strata is like a management board sitting above, oversee all the action that the building itself takes on. And then if strata is very much concerned about safety, they are unlikely to go on in having charger installed. But this is a problem, right? Particularly because, if you look at the many people are living in apartments in Sydney or anyway in big cities. And then also the reliability of the public charging network. This is more in general. How many public chargers are available? The number has increased, but it comes down the way owners plan their road trip, for instance, and how many chargers are available on the road, okay? So in this presentation, basically, I'm going to look at charging behavior. And the way I'm going to look at charging behavior and trying to understand what are the factors that affect the charging preferences, okay? And the way I'm going to look at it is like typically what they did in the literature, they assume that charging locations are mutually exclusive. In other words, if I charge at home, I model that I only charge at home, and I disregard the fact that I can charge at a supermarket or at work. This is what has been done. Whereas we go beyond that. We try to assume that there is not this assumption, and then over a fixed time period, let's say a week, I can be observed to charge at home as well as at a supermarket, at work, or a public charging facility, okay? Also, what we do here, we look at the time of day when the charging activities occur. daytime versus nighttime. If I have solar panel, probably I'm more likely to charge during the day because I can benefit from that technology, okay? And we combine this within a unique framework. Also, what we look at is what I call temporal dependence, in the sense that perhaps past choices are trying to affect my current behavior. If I charge the day before, I'm probably less likely to charge the next day in terms of charging instance, but I'm perhaps more likely to stick to the same place where I charged the day before. So the ownership survey 2024. So the idea was we team up, like I said, with the Australian Electric Vehicle Council. We designed a very long survey, and the idea was like try to understand or try to bridge the gap in terms of knowledge that we have when it comes to electric vehicle ownership. There is a huge lack of data points available. Much has been done, for example, in California. California, there is David Bunch and Jill Tass. They have a very strong team, but they also have access to over 3,000-4,000 PHV owners. So they did a great job there. In Germany, there is a national panel. There's a survey that the DLR actually conducts on a yearly basis. And we do have some information about electric vehicle owners. But in Australia, I didn't find much information about this. So the entire idea was try to come up with a survey where we can look at travel trends and we can look at charging behavior. I'm going to explain what I mean by charging behavior in the next few slides. So the idea was like we designed the survey, okay? So the survey was designed in Qualtrics together, and then the link was actually disseminated through the membership base of the Australian Vehicle Council. So there are members, and their members actually share the link with their sort of user, talking about ChargeFox, for instance, talking about Amber Electric, okay? In this way, we could sort of have increased our reach out in terms of respondents from all over Australia. And they were not paid in the sense that there was not a reward, but they could actually enter a lottery to win a private charger worth $2,000. This was the reward, a lottery, being on a lottery and try to win a charger. So these are basically the sections that we have in the survey. We look at the household vehicle fleet. So sort of we split the sample into whether there is one vehicle household and two vehicle households. We stop at 2 because we didn't sort of increase the burden in terms of describing all vehicles within the households when they have 3 or more, okay? So we stop to the 2 vehicles of the household. And we look at age, range, battery capacity, fuel type, because the primary vehicle is always an electric vehicle, but for a 2-vehicle household, they usually pair with diesel or a petrol vehicles, okay? So then we ask a bunch of questions about home and work charging setup, like what kind of charger they have, whether they can charge at work, how much they pay, the type of technology, and whether they pay for a smart meter or invest in upgrading the electrical system, for instance. And then we look at public charging use, what type of charger they use. Is a fast charger, is a slow charger, and how much they pay. And then we look at the charging preferences. And socio-demographic variables is the sort of the traditional, the standard question that we ask at the end of every survey, right? Age, income, level, location, type of dwelling, solar panel accessibility, and so on and so forth. So this is the distribution of the sample. So 1,600 respondents took part in the survey. I think more than that, but when we actually tried to clean the data, we went down to 1,600. Now, and then I further cleaned the data, and then I got down to 1,440. Okay, 160 were removed because they didn't complete the survey properly. So they share information about charging behavior, but then stopped. They didn't share information or social demographic information. Okay, and this is sort of the distribution. We can see that essentially Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales account for almost 60-65% of the sample. And it's actually, if we plot this against the current landscape in terms of vehicle ownership in Australia, is very much similar. So we kind of managed to have a good sample representation. Now, some statistics. 75% of respondents have access to solar panels, okay? Only 21% invest more than $1,000 to support EV charging at home, which means having a smart meter on a dedicated charger, okay? 72% have not upgraded the electrical system to support a sort of charging technology or advanced charging technology. Yes, David?
These are self-reported or to get their power bills?
No, this is a self-reported. I wish I had, but I didn't. 25% benefit from flexible electricity plants. What I mean by that is like this percentage, this fraction of the sample have the possibility to benefit from off-peak and peak hours. So they might sort of prompt them to charge later to benefit from a better actual price. And the average electricity per kilowatt hour is about 19 cents across the sample. And 81% reside in separate houses with private home charges. Now, the average in terms of household composition, the average, we talk about 2 households per household. 63% of households are childless. And then 70% of respondents belong to the age group 40-69. We have only less than 2% between 18 and 29. So we didn't cover that age group very well, actually. Again, they are not paid. They were invited. And also, I don't think that many people or young adults can afford to have an electric vehicle at that age, probably 20. 72% are employed. Now, if we focus on this is the 72%, okay? 72% are employed. Now, 30% of this have actually the chance to charge at the workplace, okay? So let's say we have 1,000 employed respondents. We talk about 300 of this. They can actually charge at work. Now, if we further down, those who can charge at work, 22% of employed who can charge at work, they benefit they can charge for free. So the majority, they have to pay if they want to charge at the workplace. And only 4% have access to fast charging technology. So mostly as low chargers, okay? And in terms of commuting, is on average 1 day per week. Now, this is the charging behavior section of the survey that I was talking about before. So essentially what we did, we discussed with the Electric Vehicle Council members, and we come up with these 5 locations. So we talk about home, private dwelling, talk about workplace, supermarkets and shopping center. Destination chargers are hotels, like hotel resorts or restaurants, tourist attractions. And then we have other public charging facilities, okay? It could be along travel routes or in public area. Now, what we did differently in the study? We did not preclude the possibility of selecting multiple alternatives at the same time. We give them a week and they say, in the past week, where did you charge? They could select more than one of these alternatives. And upon selecting, for instance, let's say work or supermarket, we showed this table here, okay? So they have to indicate when they charge and the day of the week they charge. So we try to cover many dimensions here. One dimension is the location, the other dimension is time, and the other is the day of the week. So we can actually look at weekends versus weekend, whether there are differences, okay? Now, when we look at overall, it doesn't surprise, 86% of the respondents reported charging at private properties. It doesn't sum to 100 simply because the same respondent could report charging in multiple locations throughout the week, okay? So the list chosen is destination chargers, 6%. 17% report charging and what we call other public charging facility. 9% at work and 13% at supermarket. Now, let's break down in terms of location and time, okay? Again, we are looking at those who report charging at this particular alternative. So 60% essentially report charging throughout the week, at home, during the day, okay? Then we have overnight, evening is only 23%. So essentially what it's telling, those who charge the most during the days because they can benefit from solar panel technology, otherwise they tend to postpone overnight, which basically it's midnight, 12 to 8 a.m., okay? Now, clearly charging at work, it's during the day is 9%. We have 1% evening overnight. Now, what I did, if you work out the combination, you could end up having 15 combination on location and time. But as you can imagine, let's say work evening and work overnight, I have few observations. So we aggregate them in a, let's say, one time slot called evening overnight. And we did the same for supermarket destination chargers, okay? So clearly, most of the sample report charging at home, in particular during the day. If we look at, let's say, outside the private dwelling setting, we can see that during the day, public charging facility are used by 12% of the sample. And then we have about 9% reporting charging at supermarkets and shopping center during the day. And this is the average. So there are on average 4 charging events reported throughout the week at home during the day. Okay, whereas when we look at the public, essentially the public sector is about 1 charging event throughout the week on average. Now, let's split into Monday to Friday and Saturday and Sunday. So what we found out essentially that most of the charging events took place during the week from Monday to Friday. And then we have only 31%, for instance, of this 58% charging on Saturday and Sunday, okay? So we can, in general, the higher proportions are among those who use public facility or public infrastructure, okay? Which are essentially public chargers, and then we look at supermarket, okay? When you break down this number. Now, I'm talking about the model specification. I promise there are a few equations, only a few, like two equations. So MDCV, okay, MDCV stands for multiple discrete continuous extreme value model. It couldn't fit into, so I just call it MDCV. And I'm briefly going to explain what each term means. If you're not familiar with choice modeling, in general, in choice modeling, when you study, every alternative could be, let's say, car, train, and bus is associated with a utility function. The underlying assumption is that I choose the alternative associated with the highest level of utility, okay? That returns the highest utility. The words multiple here means that the utility that the respondents accrue comes from summing up the utility for each of the combination that we are looking at in terms of time and location. This is a 12 because we have home during the day, home evening, home overnight, and so on and so forth. And the utility is associated to each of these alternatives, okay? It's called extreme value because there is an extreme value error, which allows to have a nice closed form when you estimate a model. Now, the nice thing about this model is that when you talk about discrete continuous, is basically what this model allows us to do is like the psi allows to capture the probability of charging. Gamma tells you how frequent you charge, which is a continuous, you might think about a linear regression model in a way, to put it simply, when it comes to gamma. How frequently you charge, where psi is telling us what is the probability that given some sort of social demographic variable and charging setting, you charge in one of this combination, okay? Now, we use proportions. I'm going to explain in the next slide what this means. And then we have this number here, S over 7. Remember, we have 7-day data points. Not all respondents reported charging 7 days. So this is an unbalanced panel. Some respondents reported charging, let's say, 4 days during the week. Some respondents just charge once throughout the week, okay? So this is an unbalanced panel. Now, this is an example, what they have to do. Essentially, this respondent indicates charging 4 times weekdays overnight at home, 3 times during the day at work. So we could actually work out the proportions, all right? And that's what we are modeling. The continuous dimension will reflect the proportion of events for each alternative, okay? And this is basically what we have. Essentially, we have for each, like I said, for each combination, we have an utility function. So we are able to estimate the probability of charging on 8 a.m., 5 p.m., on 5 p.m., 12 a.m., and so on and so forth, okay? And this is the flexibility that we have here. We don't only look at the location, we look at time, location, and time. Now, this is the second equation that I don't have any more equation in this. So what do we do? Remember, in the title, I talk about habit persistence. What is habit persistence in this setting? Well, what we simply do, we look at that, whether or not the respondent charged the day before, and we create a dummy variable. And we look at this as in terms of state-dependent variables, and how charging the day before is affecting the charging behavior today. Okay, whether there is an habit persistence, as they call in marketing. But we not only look this from a charging location, or let's say a probability of charging at home. If you do the day before, are you more likely to do the next day? But also looking in terms of how frequently you are. So if you charge twice 2 days prior to the event, this is going to affect the day charging events, the daily charging instances. Okay. Then we have socio-demographic variables, and then what we add, this eta here is an error component. So to put it simply, what we wanted to look at whether there are substitution patterns across locations or a time of the day. So if I'm more likely to charge at home during the night or overnight, I'm probably less likely to do during the day. Okay, try to look at these substitution effects. Now we estimated 111 parameters. I'm going to show some of the results because there are like way too many. Okay, so I start off. This is our basically the psi. Again, this represents the probability of charging, and all this location and time are compared against the base, which is home evening. So what you can see is like the highest value is home during the day. And again, this is aligned with the statistics. So respondents are more likely to charge at home during the day relative to home, evening, and base. When we look at work, it doesn't surprise. This is negative. So respondents are less likely to charge at work compared to home. When we look at, for instance, supermarkets, this is during the day and other public charges during the day. These are actually positive relative to home evening. What we are looking here, perhaps, is people that are doing top-up charging. So let's say you're driving, you're doing some drop-on, drop-off, and then you go to the supermarket, you do a top-up during the day. Remember, during the day, it's from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., okay? You do an activity, then if you charge there, you're less likely to do it again in the evening at home. Now, if you have a flexible electricity plan, you're less likely to charge at home during the day. Clearly, because you can benefit from off-peak prices, and you do it either in the evening, late evening, or overnight. Okay? Now, the electricity price is negative, so the more they pay, the less likely are to charge during the day at home, which again might reflect that they might defer the charging activities to later in the day. And the fact that this is positive, even if it's marginally statistically significant, is suggesting that there is a sort of substitution effect. If I increase the price of charging at home, I'm more likely to use a public charging facility. Yes?
You mentioned the data part that like 30% of people have access to their work, have access to cars at work.
Yes.
So I'm very curious how you incorporate this kind of a restriction into.
Because the model itself is able to account for corner solutions. Corner solutions occur when the respondents report zero. Zero means when the employed people report not charging at work.
Yeah, but I guess so. How do you incorporate the 70% of people in your estimates? They do not even have the choice of public charger or from kind of workplace charger. How do you incorporate that?
It's the model itself take care of the fact that you can have corner solution. The corner solution are more likely to occur when, in this case, you are not. If you are not employed, definitely you are not access to work. And then if you are employed, you are not access to work. Then the model will take off. But what I'm not showing this, but we do have a variable employed also to account for this. So we include a variable called employed to account for the effect that what be employing means in terms of charging behavior. And if you are employed, you are more likely to charge at work during the day. So we also control for that. And getting back to this point, see, for instance, we also look at free charging at work. If charging at work is free, you are more likely to charge at work relative to home. But it has no effect on the other locations. So the beauty of this formulation is not just looking at time. We can look at time, day, time of the day, location, and both. What I'm doing here is just basically looking at the location. So if I have solar panel at home, I'm less likely to charge at work, supermarket, destination, and other public chargers, because I can use that electricity, right? If I live in an apartment like a flat, definitely with respect to a townhouse on a separate house, I'm more likely to use all the public infrastructure that I have available rather than charging at home, because not likely I'm not able to charge at home. Then the more I travel to work, the more likely I am to charge at the workplace, but at the same time to use public infrastructure facilities, public infrastructure stations, okay? Supermarket and destination chargers. Now, this is the habit persistence, okay? So here we include the temporal the dependency and the probability of choosing a location. What these positive and highly statistically values are telling is there is a short-term memory. If I charge the day before at home, for instance, I'm more likely to choose the same location the next day, okay? But when it comes down to the number of charging instances, these parameters are negative. So clearly what is happening is like if I charge twice the day before, the number of charging events the next day diminish, okay? But also we include up to 2 days prior, and you can see that there is sort of a decay function. The values there is a less memory effect if you charge 2 days before rather than the day prior, okay? That's what the model is telling. So this is reflecting the fact that if I charge at work the day before, I'm likely to do the same. So basically choosing the same location. So there is a short-term memory in terms of location choice. But when it comes to the number of charging events, the number of charging instances, that clearly diminish. If I charge, like I said, 2 or 3 times the day before or 2 days prior, I'm less inclined to charge again the vehicles, whether it's at home or at work or the supermarket. This short-time memory, it doesn't appear for other public facility. So it's like there is not such effect. We didn't find this effect. And what it's telling us, again, is like if you charge at a public facility 2 or 3 days prior, they tend to do it again because probably they don't have the home charging facility, so they cannot charge at home. They're more likely to do it again. And that's why you have 1.5 is greater than 0.9. Now, remember that also what we add is an error component. So the error component in choice model allows to look at the substitution effect. When we look at substitution effect, we want to see whether or not alternative within, let's say, the same nest are likely to be substituted, okay? So the parameter is positive. It's between 0 and 1. The closer the parameter is to 1, the higher the degree of substitution, okay? So if you look at the higher degree of substitution is between home evening and home overnight. They are clearly substituted. And also we have home overnight and work during the day. If you charge overnight, you are kind of less likely to charge again during the day at work. Now, it's still statistically significant, but in terms of degrees of substitution, when we look at during the day for all the public infrastructure facilities that we included in the model, the degree of substitution is 0.5. Yes, there is if I charge a supermarket, probably I'm less likely to do it, let's say, during the day at a destination charger, but this substitution effect is lower. So I'm more likely probably to choose throughout the week, and these are more complements that substitute, if you wish, during the entire week. Now, what we do with the model, right? What we use the model for? This is a question. One thing that we did, we look at the elasticity, okay? So for instance, what we did, we increase and decrease the price of home electricity between 15 and 15 plus or minus 15%, okay? So 3 things. First of all, if you see here, it's very essentially charging at home, the demand increases substantially when we drop the price by 15%. Compared to when we increase price, the demand diminish. And the opposite holds for public charging infrastructure. So clearly, this is our substitute. If I increase charging cost at home, I'm more likely to use public charging facilities. But also what is really interesting, if you look at work, supermarket, and destination, this is basically very inelastic. So it doesn't change the behavior there. So clearly, these are locations where you do a quick top up, not where I do most of my charging activities, okay? Now, if you break down this, we can also see what is happening. Clearly, it's during the day that is driving the charging, the elasticity of the demand. If I drop the electricity cost during the day, I'm more likely to do it during the day at the expense of overnight. Whereas if I increase the cost during the day, what we're looking at is like the demand overnight increases slightly. Now, last thing, we did we did a simulation exercise because ultimately we wanted to look at the impact of on the grid. Okay, so probably it's an ambitious exercise. What we tried to do is like we had information about home charging duration, charging average work charging duration, public charging duration. Okay, and we picked New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. So the three most representative states that we had within the panel. Okay. And we did a sample. So what we look at essentially, we make some assumption about the technology at home, 7.20 kilowatt hour for charging at home. Also, we look at in the sample. This is not the sample that indicated charging the week before. This is the overall sample, okay? Where charging at home was available for 92% of the sample, and 27% roughly they can actually have work charging accessibility. So what we did, we come up with a number reflecting drivers who can charge at home and drivers who can charge at the office, essentially, at the workplace, okay? And what we did, we simulate the impact on the electricity on the grid by looking at a 15% reduction in the electricity cost at private dwellings. So what is happening, this is the electricity usage at the New South Wales weekly. And if we drop 50%, what is happening is that the total demand for electricity will increase by 0.8% here, relative to the status quo, where the price is basically, we don't change the price, we retain what it is on average, okay? And this is basically similar across New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. This increase here represents roughly, we did a calculation, 1% of the total electricity generated in New South Wales in 1 week. So just a 15%. And basically, you also look at a workplace, supermarket, and destination charge. They are not affected. Again, they are very inelastic. This is a long time. So some concluding remarks. So the survey told us that most of the charging activities occur at home. Not surprising that. And numbers are very much alike with what we see internationally. Around 90% of charging events in Europe take place at home, and that we find 86%. They are more likely to charge at home and during the day because they can benefit from solar panel technology. And workers with access to workplace charging, they tend to charge at work. When we look at the model, and again, flexible electricity plants encourage off-peak charging because they get a better electricity price, of course. Public and workplace are secondary options. Work is very underutilized. There is habit persistence. So we proved that if you charge the day before, this is going to impact the number of charging activities the day after, and is going to impact where you charge as well. And also there are substitution patterns. Now, some policy actions that sort of we can discuss. Clearly, there is a demand for charging at home. If you live in an apartment, this is very much complicated. New high-rise apartment in North Sydney, for instance, they have a new code and they are all installing chargers on the ground floor. Like there are 3-4 levels and then usually you have chargers. But this is not true for other apartments, okay? So how can we improve that? How can we overcome the discussion with Strata? And how can we overcome safety? Incentive for adopting smart meters and solar panels, because we see that 72% have access to solar panel. Now, when we ask why they didn't have access to solar panel, mostly are renting. So they basically they are renting this property, and then therefore there is no sense for them to commit. And they don't have smart meters either. Now, and the grid upgrades, yes, in the sense that we know that if we just decrease the price, we can see that the electricity usage increase. Even if it's a small percentage, it's going to have a huge impact on the grid if we increase the number of electric vehicles on the road. Now, there is an habit in nature, so there is habit persistence. Will this call a sort of dynamic prices? If I know that I return to the same place for charging, and at the same time, do I need a dynamic pricing so I can sort of canalize the demand? And of course, subsidies in particular for businesses, because I think there is an appetite, there is demand for charging at work, but yet it's not very well established. Okay? Thank you. Yes.
Slide showed that in the last year there's been significant hybrid uptake, but not very much change in the share of battery electric vehicles. What happened in April of 2024 that caused those two curves to diverge?
Actually, because in the last year and a half, in terms of pricing for cars and models, there was actually more models coming up out of China, and the pricing went drop, and this is sort of sparked the appealing of buying an electric vehicles. Yeah, I'm talking about battery. Hybrid remains pretty much quite substantial, but simply because it has to do, in my opinion, with the facility, with charging provision. That's the main thing. Because going for an hybrid vehicle is like I want to have a fuel efficient vehicle, and yet I don't rely too much on the current charging landscape. That's why it's been increasing over time, and it will go. I think it will keep increasing, because unless we have the possibility of charging it, to many people they will look for an hybrid option rather than a battery electric option, and that's why that's pretty much it.
Well, but if battery electrics are coming in from Chinese producers are coming in at lower prices now, why would that not have caused a rise in battery electric vehicles? I mean, they were pretty similar until just last year, so something happened.
So was it that the amount of batteries?
Was plateau, but as actually. There are subsidies in place, the price had dropped, but now they were discussing yesterday about removing the subsidy for buying electric, but the subsidies are not very enough. You don't pay radio.
No. So I'm just wondering whether people shifted to a battery hybrid as their choice of
There's also been
luxury car.
it's media driven as well, so there's been a large negative campaign against battery electric vehicles in general.
That's been going on since at least 20 years.
Yeah, but it sort of hit a peak like last year, beginning of last year.
Are you referring to endorsement of Trump by example?
No, but it's not.
Well, that's the.
But this was even before that. But
there's been things like media in the spotlight going on about slavery and battery technology, and it's just been this ongoing campaign, and I think people have just gone off the idea of battery electric vehicles.
But hybrids are also battery.
Yeah, but if they don't see it that way, I don't think there's a perception around that it is actually a battery electric vehicle you have to plug in.
And then if you look at that was stopped at 2024. If you look at this year is rising again. So there is actually, it's no longer kind of flat in terms of sales. It was actually catching up pretty quickly. Well, it didn't help the Trump Elon Musk situation, yes, but then probably that would be more about not buying a Tesla and buy a BYD or something like that. Like.
Plus, I think the other thing that happened was there was long lead time between when people were paying for a battery electric vehicle actually getting the battery electric vehicle. And so there's a lot of latent demand in the system. I think that slack in the supply chain sort of worked itself out and we sort of hit the actual real law as opposed to some artificial law.
Yes.
Just a quick question. Is it that you connected with data using online surveys?
Yeah, the survey was programmed in Qualtrics.
And do all users of the electric vehicles access to the online survey, or are there some population or some people who don't have access to the data may not be captured?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Like, do most of the users of the vehicles, of the electric vehicles, have access to the online survey? Because maybe there may be some people who do not have access to the online survey.
It's more about, you're talking about like a sampling strategy. Well, look, it's very, see, here's the thing. If you go to Qualtrics or any big provider and you ask for, can you disseminate this survey among electric vehicle owners? Their sample is about 200 people. And they make you cost a fortune if you want to sample these people. There was a collective effort, so I didn't have a control over who was filling out the survey, all right? So basically we have to thank the members of the Electric Vehicle Council who actually say, okay, we're gonna promote every event we go to, and also across our subscribers, and then they basically share the survey link. And in this way, you know, that's why I didn't mention that, but the survey was open for about 2 months. So from February the 1st of February 2024 to the end of March. So usually when you go for a provider, you want to wrap it up in 1 week, 2 weeks maximum. But in order to have a decent sample size or a large sample size, we kept the survey open. And that was the reason why we want to invite more people like a week had. That was the main reason.
About 89% of Australians have the mobile.
Well, no, because I'm just thinking, what if this will also be adopted in by 3? And actually in my country, most of the users of electric vehicles are under the low income. So of course, I wonder how to
Look,
like, are there other ways how to reach them out?
Like I said, in terms of reach out, you need a big partner, and the Electric Vehicle Council is the best partner in this we could ever hope to work with. And then you know, the membership base, it's quite vast, and then we could disseminate the survey, or there was like events like everything electric. There was a stand that was there. They could scan the QR code and do the survey.
Representative business in terms of EV owners.
In terms of geographical distribution, we are pretty close. In terms of statistics, age, gender, like I said, it's a very kind of skewing towards old adult sample.
There's people who own EVs, how representative would your data of that population?
I'm not sure there are data available in terms of general data out there. You can find some information, but not many information about gender. And you can have aggregate data, but not to that level that I'm aware of.
Ownership survey? No.
I don't think you can get data to the income level, to the age. Otherwise, I would have used that. Yeah.
A very quick question. So you are proposing the EVs as a solution for the emission. But what I believe is that if we are just considering that all the vehicles are electric and we are providing their energy, we are doing that using just by burning some fossil fuels or something, and converting every type of energy into electric is it's not perfect. We have some wastage. So in this way, we are actually either are increasing the level of fossil fuels that we are burning to provide the energy for these vehicles, or we are just relying on the solar system. which what I believe it's not only feasible for us to do everywhere, just install solar system to provide the energy. So do you think it is a viable solution to just even increase the level of EVs?
Well, I don't think that this is the only solution. The best solution would be you invest in public transport, people use public transport, nobody drives their car. Because anyway, what you say is correct. For instance, if you charge your vehicle in Tasmania, 94% of or 84% of the electricity comes from hydro. If you do the same in New South Wales, it comes from coal. Now, I don't think that having the entire fleet electric is a solution. Then you're right, because anyway, the electricity must be produced from coal, fossil fuel. So unless we go for renewal, that is a long stretch. And definitely, it's right. Probably you have to combine fuel efficient vehicle with transport policy. So some people might be, sort of use public transport and then don't emit. Because what we also find in electric vehicle owners tend to drive a bit more, and that has to do with the fact that the petrol price was rising. So we also look at this behavior. So alone, it will not help if you want to cut emission. I have to be like a more general effort in
You're
this.
also making assumptions because I think after about 3.5 years, if you look at lifetime emissions, life cycle emissions, even driving in New South Wales, an electric vehicle will break even with an IC and become better over time. So the longer you drive, even with the current electrical system, ICEs will actually improve. But you have to drive them for about 3.5 years before you reach the break-even.
I think that now there are few studies in Norway that English people are driving more kilometers when they switch to it.
Well,
The overall effect is
but that's also because of new cars. People are, if you have an old car and a new car in your household, you're more likely to drive the new car. And EV is more likely to be the new car.
Yes.
So I think some of that is implicit. And also, if it's the nicer car, you're more likely to drive the nicer car within a household. But I think the key would be that renewables are continuing to increase in market share, and in New South Wales, snowy hydro 2 is going to come online eventually, and that's going to allow pumped hydro storage. I think there's a lot of things happening in renewables that will. I would be surprised in 2040 if any of the electric grid is fossil fuels.
Gregor, who's the electrical guy here, has a slide where he actually shows the eastern seaboard. You can actually power the entire electrical grid from solar. You just don't have the converters to actually be able to do it properly. So we do have the ability, we just don't have the infrastructure or the ability to actually do it.
Just, no, you go first.
Yeah, you go.
I
go.
It's kind of related. I mean, I think it's a bit of a commentary maybe on the messaging with the policy implications, because I think one of yours was to invest more in charging facilities at work.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that one of our best bets for getting cars off the road is tackling the journey to work. So maybe we need to take a little bit of care when considering what the wider implications of saying, yeah, put charging facilities in your work. You're encouraging people to drive to work. Similarly, I guess with grocery shopping and things like that, I anecdotally know plenty of friends who will drive to the shops to charge their car and do the shopping at the same time. So I think from a sustainability perspective, if we're looking at the overarching system, we're probably better putting eggs in the home basket, maybe keep the cars at home.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, like using public transport more in a more, like if you want to look at the bigger picture, I agree with you, but still.
What that rhetoric around, put your charging facilities at work.
But at the same time, so I think, if there are still people coming back to the office, and that's what it seems to happen, like going back to the office, if they drive, and I think at least having some facility support charging, I don't think they will shift the demand completely that everyone who owns an electric vehicle all of a sudden go to work every day, but clearly they will have them charging.
Yeah, I guess just something to know.
okay. I think we're